I got home just before midnight, dropped my keys on the counter, and saw the bank alert on my phone. Account balance, $0. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Then I saw my aunt sitting at the kitchen table, calm, scrolling on her tablet like nothing had happened. She didn't look up when I asked about the transfer. She just said, "We had a family discussion. You didn't need to be part of it." I got home just before midnight, the house quiet in the way it only is when everyone else is asleep and you're running on autopilot. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and reached for my phone out of habit. That's when I saw the notification. Account balance, $0. At first, I honestly thought it was a mistake. Banks glitch, apps freeze, numbers lag. I refreshed the screen, then I refreshed it again. Same number, 0, not low, not pending. Empty. That account wasn't just money. It was my son's college fund. 12 years of disciplined saving, birthdays, bonuses, tax refunds, money I didn't touch. Money I treated like it didn't belong to me, because in my mind, it didn't. It belonged to his future. I stood there longer than I realized, phone glowing in my hand, brain trying to build a reasonable explanation before fear had time to catch up. Maybe it moved accounts. Maybe there was a transfer delay. Maybe. Then I noticed the light in the kitchen was on. I hadn't turned it on before I left. I hadn't expected anyone to be up. I walked in slowly and saw my Aunt Carol sitting at the table, legs crossed, tablet propped up in front of her, scrolling with one finger like she was killing time in a waiting room. She looked completely at ease. Too at ease. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Did you move money out of the Horizon account?" She didn't look up right away. She scrolled once more, tapped the screen, then finally lifted her eyes to me. No guilt, no surprise, just mild annoyance, like I'd interrupted her. "We had a family discussion," she said. "You didn't need to be part of it. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no urgency, just a statement delivered with the kind of confidence people use when they believe they're in charge." I stared at her for a moment, waiting for something else to follow. It didn't. "You emptied my son's college fund," I said. She shrugged. "It's not empty. It's being used." "Used for what?" "For something important." I took a slow breath. Years ago, I'd learned the value of not reacting immediately. I'd learned it the hard way, growing up in a family where reacting meant you lost. "Where is the money?" I asked. She leaned back in the chair. "Your cousin needed help." This was the logical solution. Logical. That word landed wrong. Logical implies consent. Structure. Agreement. "You took money saved for my child," I said carefully, without telling me. "You're always traveling," she replied. "We couldn't wait." That was when I felt it. Not anger yet. Something colder. The quiet realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision that had already been justified, rehearsed, and approved just without me. I went upstairs to check on my son. He was asleep, sprawled sideways across his bed, one arm hanging off the mattress, his science fair ribbon still pinned to the corkboard above his desk. He had no idea that something meant for him had just been taken while he dreamed. I closed his door gently and went back downstairs. Carol was still at the table, now pouring herself a glass of water like she planned to be there a while. "How much did you take?" I asked. "All of it." "How much was that?" She waved her hand. "Enough." I can't laugh. I nodded. "Where is it now?" "With Mark," she said. "It went into the business." My cousin Mark, the dreamer, the entrepreneur. The one who had never quite landed on his feet but always had a new idea ready to go. Coffee roasting, online fitness gear, crypto consulting. Each one pitched with excitement, each one quietly abandoned once the money ran out. "And you thought this was okay," I said. She sighed like I was being difficult. "Your son has time." "Mark doesn't. Its time isn't. I president to the bound." That sentence did something to me. It didn't make me angry. It made me very clear. "I want the money returned," I said. She shook her head immediately. "It's already committed. Payroll, vendors, inventory. You can't just pull it back." "I didn't authorize this." She smiled then. Not kindly, reassuringly, the way adults smile at children when they think they know better. "You put the account under family management," she said. "That was your choice." That was true. Years ago, after my divorce, when money felt tight and life felt unstable, Carol had offered help. She'd pitched the idea of a family-managed investment account, better returns, shared oversight, trust. "You shouldn't be handling this alone," she'd said back then. "Let family help." And I'd believed her, because I wanted to, because trusting felt easier than guarding. "I need documentation," I said now. She frowned. "Why?" "Because this wasn't approved." She tapped her tablet again. Everything was done properly. Then showing me the paperwork shouldn't be a problem. Her jaw tightened slightly. Just enough to notice. "You're overreacting," she said. "This will work out. It always does." "For who?" I didn't ask. I already knew the answer. I went to my office and pulled up my laptop, logged into the account portal. The transfer history was right there, a full withdrawal. One transaction, authorized earlier that afternoon. The name on the authorization line wasn't mine. I stared at it, my heart steady, my hands cold. "Carol," I called out. "Who signed off on this?" She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed now. "I did," she said. "As trustee, you don't have signing authority for withdrawals over $10,000. She didn't answer right away. "That clause only applies if what? If the funds are being used for personal benefit. And this wasn't? It was for family." There it was. The word that had been used to excuse everything my entire life. I closed my laptop. "I'm going to bed," I said. She looked surprised. "We're not finished." "I am." I went upstairs, shut my door, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pace. I just thought about my son, about trust, about how quietly some people believe they own you. The next morning, Carol was gone. No note, no message, just a clean kitchen and the lingering sense that she believed the matter settled. I made breakfast, drove my son to school, kissed his forehead, and told him to have a good day. Then I went back home, sat at my desk, and started pulling records. I wasn't angry yet. I was done being careless. I spent the rest of that morning doing what I should have done years earlier. I stopped assuming good intentions and started verifying facts. I pulled every statement from the last 5 years. Every email Carol had ever sent me about the account. Every message where she'd reassured me that things were handled and I didn't need to worry about details. At the time, I'd taken that as kindness. Now it read like insulation layers between me and information I should have been checking myself. The transfer itself was clean on the surface. One withdrawal, no fragmentation, no obvious attempt to hide it. That alone told me something important. Carol hadn't thought she was doing anything wrong. She'd thought she was entitled. The authorization line listed her name and a digital signature. I compared it to the original trust documents I had saved in a folder I rarely opened because looking at them reminded me how much faith I'd placed in other people. The limitation clause was clear. Withdrawals over $10,000 required written consent from both trustees. There were 2 trustees, me and Carol. My consent wasn't there. I checked the timestamp on the authorization, mid-afternoon. I'd been in Denver that day, in meetings from morning until evening. My phone records would prove that if I needed them. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. Not anger. Confirmation. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Hey, Aunt Carol said you're upset. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Instead, I called my ex-wife. We don't talk often, but when it comes to our son, we're aligned. "They took the college fund," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Who did?" "Carol. She moved it into Mark's business." "That's not legal," she said immediately. "I know. What are you going to do?" I looked at the screen in front of me, full of dates and numbers and signatures that didn't belong. "I'm going to handle it." She didn't ask how. She knew me well enough not to. After I hung up, I made my first appointment. A forensic accountant, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted clarity. I wanted to know exactly what had been done, and whether this was the first time Carol had treated other people's money like a communal emergency fund. The accountant's office was in a low, nondescript building near the highway. Inside, everything was beige and quiet, like the space itself had been designed to keep emotions from echoing. He listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. He didn't react when I mentioned family. He didn't soften when I mentioned my son. He just nodded and took notes. "Send me everything," he said. "Statements, emails, original agreements." "How long will it take?" I asked. "A few days," he replied. "But I can already tell you this isn't going to look good for her." "'Tis various." I drove home feeling steady, focused, the kind of calm that comes when uncertainty has been replaced with direction. That evening, Carol showed up again. I heard her before I saw her. The front door opened without knocking, the same way it always had, like the house was still hers to enter whenever she wanted. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her mouth already set in irritation. "You've been avoiding Mark," she said. "I've been busy." "Dies. You don't get to disappear when there's a family issue." I turned off the stove and faced her. "This isn't a family issue. This is a legal one." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't threaten me." "I'm not. You're acting like I stole from you. You took money without authorization." She scoffed. "It was for your nephew. My son's future isn't a line of credit." She stepped closer. "You're being dramatic." I studied her face, really looked at it. The certainty, the absence of doubt. "You never asked me," I said. "We didn't need to." That sentence landed harder than anything else she'd said. "You didn't need to," I repeated. She exhaled sharply. "You've always been practical. We thought you'd understand." Understand. That word again, always used when what they really meant was comply. "I want the money returned," I said. "It can't be." "Then we're done talking." She laughed once, short and sharp. "You wouldn't really drag family into court." I didn't answer. She waited, clearly expecting reassurance. When it didn't come, her expression shifted. "You're overestimating your position," she said. "The account was structured the way it was because you didn't want to manage it. That doesn't mean I gave up ownership." "We'll see," she replied. She left without another word, her confidence intact, like she'd already won. The accountant called 2 days later. "This wasn't the first transfer," he said. I closed my eyes. "How many?" "3," he replied. "Smaller amounts, different accounts, different years." My stomach tightened. "Whose money?" "Your parents' retirement account, your sister's inheritance trust, all under Carol's management. And they know?" "They may not," he said carefully. The transactions were framed as temporary reallocations. I thanked him and hung up. That was the moment the situation changed. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This was a pattern. I scheduled the second appointment. A civil attorney recommended by the accountant. His office was sharper, cleaner, all glass and dark wood. He read through the documents without commentary, flipping pages slowly, methodically. "She forged your authorization," he said finally. "She claims trustee privilege. That doesn't override consent clauses. What are my options?" He looked at me. "You can demand repayment. You can file a civil suit. And given the pattern, the bank may initiate their own investigation." I nodded. "I want my son's money protected." "We can do that immediately," he said. "New account. New trustee structure. No shared authority. And Carol? That depends on how far you want to go." I thought of my son asleep in his room, of how carefully I'd saved for him, of how casually that had been dismissed. "I want this handled properly," I said. The next week was quiet on the surface and busy underneath. Accounts were frozen. Documentation was requested. Carol stopped calling. Mark started calling more. I didn't answer him either. On Friday afternoon, I picked my son up from school. He talked about a project he was excited about, something involving bridges and weight limits. He asked if college was really as hard as people said. "Some parts are," I told him. "But you'll be ready." That night, after he went to bed, I checked my email. There was a message from the bank. Subject line, "Urgent, account review in progress." I read it twice. Carol had thought family meant access. She'd never considered what it would mean when access was revoked. And I hadn't even started yet. The first sign that things were unraveling came on a Tuesday morning, quietly, the way real consequences usually arrive. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local, so I answered. "This is Diane from Horizon Financial," the woman said. Her voice was polite, measured. "I'm calling regarding the trust account you're listed on as beneficiary and co-trustee." "Yes," I said. "We've placed a temporary hold on several accounts pending review." "I'm aware." There was a pause, just long enough to register surprise. "Then you understand why I'm calling." "I do." She cleared her throat. "We'll need you to come in to verify a few things. In person." "Of course." After I hung up, I sat there for a minute, staring at the wall, not because I was nervous, but because I recognized the shift. Up until now, everything had happened in private. Emails, documents, quiet appointments. This was the moment it started moving out of Carol's control and into systems that didn't care about family narratives. That afternoon, Mark showed up at my house. I saw his car through the front window before he rang the bell. He didn't text. He didn't call. He just showed up, like urgency gave him permission. I opened the door and didn't invite him in. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite land. "Can we talk?" "We're talking," I replied. He glanced past me, toward the hallway. "Can I come inside?" "No." His jaw tightened. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I reported unauthorized activity on an account." "You know what I mean," he snapped. "The bank froze our operating funds. Payroll bounced." "That sounds like a business problem." His eyes flashed. "That money was already spent. Then it shouldn't have been taken." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a half step before stopping himself. "Aunt Carol said you were always practical. She said you'd understand this was temporary." I looked at him steadily. "Did you know the money was my son's college fund?" He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. "She said it was family money." "It wasn't." "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "You're ruining everything over paperwork." "Paperwork is what keeps people from taking things that aren't theirs." He scoffed. "You're really going to let lawyers destroy the family over this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, "You should talk to your attorney." That did it. His confidence cracked. "You think I can afford one?" he shot back. "That's not my responsibility." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then his expression hardened. "You think you're better than us," he said. "I think my child comes first." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing else to say. He left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I locked it behind him and went back to my desk. The next day, I met Diane at the bank. She was younger than I expected, efficient, all crisp lines and neutral expressions. She laid out the situation without drama. "We've identified discrepancies in trustee authorizations," she said, specifically withdrawals that exceeded unilateral limits. "And the signature?" I asked. She slid a document across the desk. "That's under review." I glanced at it. The signature looked like mine at a distance. Same shape, same slant. But close up, the pressure was wrong. The flow was off. Whoever had done it had practiced, but not enough. "Has Carol been notified?" I asked. "Yes," Diane said. "She was contacted yesterday." And she was surprised. I almost smiled. "We'll be initiating a broader audit," Diane continued, "given the overlap across multiple accounts." End quote. "How many?" "4 so far." I nodded. "I want my son's funds moved immediately." "That's already in process," she said. "New account. Your sole authority." "Good." When I got home, my phone was full of messages. Carol, my parents, my sister. Missed calls stacked on top of each other, texts ranging from confused to furious. "What is going on?" "Carol says there's a misunderstanding." "Why is the bank calling us?" "You need to fix this." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down with my attorney and reviewed the next steps: demand letters, civil filings, formal removal of Carol as trustee across all accounts. "They're going to push back," he warned. "They already are," I said. "They'll frame this as betrayal." "They always do." He nodded. "You're prepared for the fallout?" I thought about my son, about the question he'd asked me the other night. Quiet and serious. "College is really expensive, right?" "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." Descom. The fallout came faster than expected. My parents showed up at my house that weekend, both of them visibly shaken. They looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, like certainty had been propping them up and someone had kicked it out from under them. My mother didn't waste time. "Why are there investigators looking at our retirement account?" she demanded. I invited them in, offered coffee they didn't drink, and sat across from them at the table where Carol had sat so comfortably just days earlier. Because money was moved without authorization, I said. My father frowned. Carol said it was a temporary adjustment. She said a lot of things. You should have come to us first, my mother said. I didn't know you were victims too. That stopped her. Victims? She repeated. I slid a folder across the table. Statements. Highlighted transfers. Dates. My father picked them up, his hands unsteady. He flipped through slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. This isn't right, he said quietly. No, I agreed, it isn't. My mother's voice trembled. She wouldn't do that. She did. Silence settled over the table. Not peaceful. Heavy. What happens now? My father asked. The bank will decide, I said, and so will the court. My mother looked at me, eyes sharp now. You could stop this. And David. I could have stopped it by staying quiet, I replied. I chose not to. You're tearing the family apart, she said. I met her gaze. Carol did that when she decided consent was optional. They left an hour later, shaken, subdued, not angry at me yet. That would come later, once denial had time to harden. That night, after my son went to bed, I sat alone in the living room and let myself feel it. Not guilt, relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying other people's expectations on my back. I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't being practical at my own expense. The audit expanded. More calls. More documents. Carol's name started appearing in places it shouldn't have. Small transfers. Quiet decisions. All justified under the same logic. Family. By the end of the week, the bank formally removed her as trustee on every account under review. She called me that night. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. Because this wasn't about punishing her. It was about ending her access. And that was something I could finally control. The formal notice arrived the following Monday in a thick, white envelope with the bank's logo stamped cleanly in the corner. I opened it at my desk, coffee untouched, my son already on the bus to school. The language inside was careful and restrained, the way institutions speak when they're about to do something serious. Carol had been suspended as trustee pending the outcome of the investigation. All associated accounts were under review. Any further contact regarding the funds was to go through counsel. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the envelope. That afternoon, my sister called. We hadn't spoken much over the years, not because we were estranged, but because she preferred not to get involved in anything complicated. She liked peace, even when it was built on other people swallowing discomfort. What's going on? She asked without preamble. Mom's crying. Dad won't talk. Carol says you're trying to ruin her. I'm not trying to do anything, I said. I reported fraud. There was a pause. Fraud is a strong word. It's the correct one. She was helping Mark, my sister said. You know how he is. I know exactly how he is. You could have handled this quietly. I did handle it quietly. The bank made it public. She's family, my sister insisted. So is my son. That ended the conversation. She didn't argue after that. She just sighed, the sound of someone realizing they weren't going to get what they wanted, and hung up. 2 days later, Carol showed up at my office. Not my house. Not a neutral location. My office. The place where my name was on the door and professionalism mattered. It was a calculated move, meant to remind me that I had a reputation to protect. The receptionist buzzed me, her voice hesitant. There's a woman here asking for you. She says it's urgent. Actually rebutted. I knew before she finished the sentence. I walked out to the lobby and saw Carol standing there, purse clutched in both hands, eyes sharp, posture rigid. She looked smaller than usual, not physically, but energetically, like her certainty had been replaced by something brittle. We need to talk, she said. This isn't appropriate, I replied. You don't get to decide that anymore. I looked at the receptionist. Give us 5 minutes. We stepped into a small conference room. The door closed behind us with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. You went behind my back, Carol said immediately. I went through the bank. You humiliated me. I protected my child. She scoffed. Don't make this about him. This is about you trying to punish me. This is about you taking money without consent. She leaned forward, hands on the table. You knew what you were agreeing to when you put me in charge. I agreed to oversight, not theft. Einquote. Her face flushed. That money was just sitting there. That's the point. You're acting like I'm some criminal. The bank seems to think there are questions. Her mouth tightened. You could still stop this. I met her gaze. I won't. She straightened slowly, smoothing her jacket like composure was something she could put back on if she tried hard enough. You're making a mistake, she said. You think this ends with me. I think it ends with you not having access to what isn't yours. You're burning bridges. I'm closing doors. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The bank completed its audit. The attorney filed the civil suit. Demand letters went out to Mark's business and to Carol personally. The amounts were itemized, the timelines laid out in black and white. Mark's company didn't survive the scrutiny. Vendors pulled out. Accounts stayed frozen. Employees left. By the end of the month, the business was insolvent. He blamed me publicly, on social media, in group texts, to anyone who would listen. He framed it as betrayal, as greed, as me choosing money over family. People who didn't know the details nodded along. People who never do. I didn't respond. What surprised me was my parents. They didn't defend Carol. Not openly. They didn't defend me either. They hovered somewhere in between, caught between loyalty and reality. My mother called once, her voice tired. She says she didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I know. She says she was doing what was best. For whom? Silence. Can this be fixed? My mother asked finally. It's already being fixed, I said, just not the way she wants. The funds were returned to my son's account in stages, principal first, then penalties, then interest. Each deposit came with a notification that made my chest loosen a little more. I sat my son down one evening after dinner. Remember when I told you your college money was safe? I asked. He nodded. It still is. He didn't ask questions. He trusted me. That trust felt heavier than anything else I'd carried through this. The final court date came 3 months later. Carol didn't look at me once during the proceedings. Her attorney spoke in circles. Mine didn't need to. The documents did the talking. The judge ruled swiftly. Unauthorized transfers. Breach of fiduciary duty. Restitution required. Trustee removal upheld. When it was over, Carol left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, my parents stood near the steps, uncertain. My father approached me slowly. You did what you had to do, he said. I nodded. That was enough. We don't see Carol anymore. She moved out of state not long after the ruling. Mark took a job with someone else's company, something small, something supervised. My sister stopped calling. Life settled. The house got quieter. Mornings became routine again. My son started talking about colleges with excitement instead of worry. I updated the account passwords, locked everything down, and set reminders to review statements monthly. I learned something through all of this. Not about money or law or family. About permission. Some people believe that being close to you gives them rights over you, over your time, your resources, your decisions. They're wrong. The hardest part wasn't reporting Carol. It wasn't the confrontation or the fallout or the way people whispered afterward. The hardest part was accepting that the version of family I'd been protecting never actually protected me. Once I let that go, everything else was just process. And process, I can handle. The quiet that followed surprised me. I had expected more calls, more accusations, more attempts to pull me back into arguments I no longer wanted to have. Instead, things simply stopped. Like a power source had been cut, and everyone was waiting to see if it would come back on. It didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. The house settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing shoes that actually fit after years of squeezing into the wrong size. I woke up earlier. I slept better. I checked my accounts the way I should have all along, not because I was anxious, but because I was responsible. My son noticed the change before I did. You're not on your phone as much, he said one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. I'm trying to be more present, I replied. He nodded like that made sense and went back to drying plates. Kids pick up on more than we give them credit for. They feel tension even when you think you're hiding it well. They also feel relief. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from Carol's attorney. Not threatening, not apologetic, procedural. Confirmation that restitution had been completed, that trustee authority had been formally terminated, that there would be no further appeals. I read it once and shredded it. That chapter was closed. The ripple effects, though, kept moving outward. Extended family gatherings became smaller. Holidays were quieter. Some relatives stopped inviting me altogether, uncomfortable with the fact that I had disrupted a long-standing arrangement they'd benefited from indirectly. Others reached out privately, cautiously, to ask questions they'd never asked before. Did she really take money from you? Did she ever do anything with ours? What should we check? I answered honestly when asked. I didn't campaign. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth and let people decide what to do with it. A few months after everything wrapped up, my son came home from school with a college brochure tucked under his arm. He dropped it on the kitchen counter like it was nothing, but I saw the way his fingers lingered on the edge. They came to talk to us today, he said, about planning early. I picked it up, glanced at the cover. And? He shrugged. It made me think. About what? About how you always said it wasn't about where I go, he replied. It was about having the option. The Zivus downed it. I swallowed. That's still true. He smiled, small and genuine, and went upstairs to do his homework. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because I'd won something, not because Carol had lost, but because my son felt secure enough to think forward instead of wondering what might disappear next. I did make one change after everything settled. I closed the family-managed accounts entirely, not just mine. I encouraged my parents to do the same. They resisted at first, embarrassed, defensive, but eventually they listened. They moved their retirement funds to an independent advisor. They stopped letting Carol handle things. They stopped assuming trust was safer than structure. Our relationship didn't return to what it had been before. It became something flatter, more distant, but also more honest. They no longer asked me to smooth things over. I no longer offered. Mark sent me an email about a year later. It was short. No accusations, no apologies either. I still think you went too far, but I guess that's your right. I didn't respond. Not everything needs closure. Some things just need distance. People ask me sometimes if I regret how far it went, if I wish I'd tried harder to keep the peace, if I think it was worth losing family over money. I tell them the same thing every time. It wasn't about money. It was about permission. Permission to access what wasn't theirs. Permission to decide what mattered more. Permission to assume my child would always come last because he was quiet, patient, and young. I don't regret taking that permission away. What I learned is simple, even if it took me a long time to learn it. Calm doesn't mean compliant, silence doesn't mean agreement, and family doesn't get a vote when it comes to your child's future. If I hadn't checked that account that night, if I'd trusted the explanation, if I'd let it go because confronting it felt uncomfortable, the loss wouldn't have stopped there. It never does. The money would have been gone. Then something else. Then something else after that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't explode. I documented. I reported. I followed through. And that was enough. Now, when I lock the door at night and walk past my son's room, I don't feel that low-grade tension I used to mistake for normal. I feel something steadier, control. The truth is, the aftermath didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. Once the adrenaline wore off, what remained was a series of small, practical decisions that reshaped my life in ways I hadn't expected. I took a week off work, not because I needed rest, but because I needed space to reset the routines I'd been maintaining out of habit rather than intention. I cleaned out the filing cabinet in my office, shredded documents I no longer needed, and reorganized everything that mattered into folders I could actually understand. Not because the paper itself was important, but because clarity had become something I valued more than convenience. I also made an appointment with a financial planner, not one recommended by family, not one who knew Carol, someone neutral, someone whose only job was to answer my questions without assumptions. We spent 3 hours going over everything: income, savings, long-term planning, my son's education timeline. I asked questions I'd never asked before because I'd always assumed someone else had already handled them. "You're in good shape," the planner said near the end. "You always were, you just didn't know it." That stayed with me. For years, I'd let other people position themselves as necessary intermediaries, people who insisted I needed help, guidance, oversight, people who benefited from my belief that I couldn't manage on my own. I could. I always could. The shift showed up in small ways first. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who didn't need explanations. I stopped softening boundaries so they would sound nicer. I stopped volunteering information just to keep others comfortable. My parents noticed. "You seem different," my mother said one afternoon when we met for lunch. "More firm." "I'm just clearer," I replied. She nodded, stirring her soup. "Your father says you've always been like this. You just didn't use it." That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I was going to get, and I accepted it for what it was. At home, things were calmer too. My son settled into school with less anxiety. His grades improved, not because he was suddenly trying harder, but because he wasn't distracted by uncertainty anymore. Children don't need to know details to feel instability. They just need to sense when something isn't secure. One night, as I was tucking him in, he asked, "Are we okay now?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "We are." He believed me. A few months later, something unexpected happened. My aunt's name came up again, not in a threatening way, but in a cautionary one. A cousin I barely spoke to reached out. "I'm checking my accounts," she said, "just to be safe." "Good," I replied. "That must have been hard," she added. "It was necessary," I said. And that was that. I never confronted Carol again. I didn't need to. The systems I'd put in place did what they were designed to do. They removed her access. They prevented repetition. They didn't require my emotional involvement. That, more than anything, felt like justice. As for Mark, his life moved on in ways that no longer intersected with mine. I heard updates through the family grapevine. New job, new city, new complaints about unfair treatment. The story always cast him as the victim of circumstances rather than choices. I didn't correct anyone. I had learned that you don't need to change people's minds to change outcomes. You just need to change who has control. The biggest change, though, was internal. I stopped second-guessing myself. Before all this, I had a habit of replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too rigid, too much. Now, when doubt crept in, it didn't last. I reminded myself of the facts, of the documents, of the signatures that weren't mine, of my son sleeping peacefully in the next room. That was my anchor. One evening, while organizing old files, I came across the original email Carol had sent years ago, the one where she'd pitched the idea of the family-managed account. I read it slowly. "You don't need to worry about this. I'll handle everything. You can focus on being a good parent." At the time, that had sounded like support. Now it read like a warning I'd ignored. I deleted the email. I didn't need reminders of lessons already learned. Life didn't become perfect after that. It became simpler. Problems still came up. Decisions still needed to be made, but they were my decisions, made with full information and clear authority. And when people disagreed, they did so from the outside, where disagreement belongs. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about how easily this could have gone differently, how one moment of inattention, one instinct to avoid conflict, could have quietly altered my son's future without him ever knowing why. That thought still made my chest tighten, but it also made me grateful. Grateful that I'd checked my phone that night, grateful that I'd asked questions, grateful that when someone told me I didn't need to be part of the discussion, I'd decided that wasn't true. Because no one else gets to decide what you need to be part of when it comes to your child. That's not drama. That's responsibility. And once I finally accepted that, everything else fell into place. Time has a way of exposing what conflict hides. Once the noise dies down, what's left becomes harder to ignore. About 6 months after everything settled, my parents asked if we could talk. Not urgently, not emotionally. Just a request, delivered carefully, like they were testing unfamiliar ground. We met at a diner halfway between our houses. Neutral territory, public enough to keep things civil, familiar enough to feel safe. My father spoke first. "We didn't know," he said. I nodded. "I know. That's not an excuse," my mother added quickly. "But it's the truth." I let that sit. For years, truth in our family had been selective, useful, deployed when it smoothed things over and ignored when it complicated them. "What happens now?" my father asked. "That depends," I said, "on what you want." My mother folded her hands together. "We want to be part of your son's life." "You are," I replied. "As grandparents." "Not as decision makers." She nodded. We understand. It's an everybody mun. I believed her, not because she'd suddenly changed, but because circumstances had. Carol was no longer the center of gravity. Without her steering conversations, things drifted into more honest places. We talked for an hour, about boundaries, about trust, about how things would work going forward. No raised voices, no defensiveness, just clarity. When we stood to leave, my mother hesitated. "I wish we'd listened to you sooner." "So do I said. That was the closest thing to reconciliation we were going to have, and I was okay with that. At home, life continued to stabilize in quiet, measurable ways. My son joined a robotics club. I adjusted my work schedule to travel less. Not because I had to, but because I could. The money that had once been a source of anxiety was now simply a tool, doing what it was meant to do. One afternoon, while helping my son with homework, he asked, "Why do adults make things so complicated?" I smiled. "Because they forget to check who's actually responsible." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded, like it made sense. That was another thing I hadn't expected, the way this experience sharpened my own sense of accountability, not just financially, but emotionally. I became more deliberate about what I agreed to, more careful about what I delegated, more aware of how easily good intentions can be used as leverage. A year passed. Carol's name came up less and less. When it did, it was usually in the context of warnings whispered between relatives. Don't let her manage anything. Double-check documents. Keep things in writing. I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't need to. The outcome spoke for itself. What surprised me most was how little I thought about her. For a long time, she'd occupied an outsized space in my mental landscape. The authority figure, the fixer, the person whose approval I'd subconsciously sought even as I resented it. Once that illusion broke, there wasn't much left to hold on to. My son started high school. We toured campuses. We talked about possibilities, not pressures, not expectations, just options. One night, as we were driving home from a college information session, he said, "I like that you don't freak out about this stuff." I glanced at him. I freaked out a little. He shook his head. "Not like other parents." That felt like a win. The final twist came quietly, almost anticlimactically. I received an email from the bank's legal department. A follow-up, a formality. They'd completed a separate investigation into Carol's activities and had referred findings to a regulatory board. Not my case. Not my business anymore. I closed the email and deleted it. Whatever consequences came from that would unfold without me. That night, I sat on the porch and thought about how this all started. With a single notification, a number on a screen that didn't make sense. If I'd ignored it, if I'd trusted the explanation, if I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth the trouble, everything that followed hinged on that moment. People like to frame stories like this as revenge, as dramatic confrontations, as emotional reckonings. But that wasn't what this was. This was maintenance. I identified a breach. I secured the system. I removed unauthorized access. I documented the process. And I moved on. The hardest part wasn't taking action. It was accepting that some relationships only function when you're willing to be exploited. Once you stop, they collapse under their own weight. That's not cruelty, that's reality. My son will probably never fully understand what happened, and that's exactly how it should be. Children shouldn't carry adult conflicts. They should carry possibilities. As for me, I don't tell this story often. Only when someone asks how to handle a situation where family crosses a line and expects forgiveness to erase accountability, I tell them this: stay calm, stay factual, stay focused on what you're responsible for. You don't need permission to protect what matters. You just need the courage to check the numbers and act on what you find. By the second year, the story had faded into something quieter, something that no longer announced itself every time I thought about money or family. It didn't disappear, exactly. It settled, like a scar that stops hurting but still reminds you where not to lean. That was when I noticed another change. People stopped assuming things about me. Before, relatives had spoken to me like I was the default solution, the one who would cover the gap, smooth the situation, say yes because it was easier than explaining no. After everything that happened, those assumptions vanished. Requests came carefully now. Sometimes they didn't come at all. It wasn't that people respected me more, it was that they understood limits existed. That difference mattered. One afternoon, I was reviewing my son's updated college plan when he wandered into my office and leaned against the doorframe. He watched me for a minute before speaking. "You like spreadsheets," he said. "I like knowing where things stand." He nodded. "I think I want to study engineering." I looked up at him. "Yeah? Yeah. I like figuring out how stuff works." I smiled. "You're good at that." He hesitated, then added, "You're good at it too." That caught me off guard. Not because it was praise, but because it was observation. He wasn't complimenting me. He was naming something he'd seen. That night, after he went to bed, I thought about how easily this could have gone another way, how he might have learned different lessons if I'd chosen differently, lessons about swallowing unfairness, about accepting that authority always comes from age or volume or family hierarchy. Instead, he'd seen something else: calm, process, follow through. I didn't tell him the details. I didn't need to. Kids don't need case files, they need models. Around that time, I started getting questions from people outside the family, coworkers, acquaintances, friends of friends, not about Carol specifically, but about situations that sounded uncomfortably familiar. "My sister wants to manage my accounts. My parents say it's easier if everything goes through them. My uncle keeps borrowing money and promising it's temporary." I didn't give speeches. I didn't warn dramatically. I asked simple questions. Is it documented? Do you have access? Can they do it without your consent? Most people already knew the answers. They just hadn't wanted to say them out loud. One evening, my parents invited us over for dinner. It was the first time in a while they'd done that without an agenda attached. The house felt different, quieter, less crowded by unspoken expectations. My mother watched my son talk about school with my father, her expression soft. "You did right by him," she said to me quietly while we were in the kitchen. I didn't respond right away. Not because I disagreed, but because I didn't need validation anymore. "I did my job," I said finally. She nodded. That's what I meant. We didn't talk about Carol. We didn't talk about money. We talked about weather, plans, ordinary things. It felt strangely healthy. Driving home later, my son said, "Grandma seems different." "She's adjusting," I replied. "To what?" "To not being in charge of everything." He thought about that. "That sounds hard." "For some people," I said, "it is." Another year passed. College visits turned into applications. Applications turned into acceptance letters. When the first one arrived, my son ran into the house, waving the envelope like it might disappear if he stopped moving. "I got in," he said, breathless. I hugged him, pride swelling in my chest, not just because of the school, but because he'd gotten there without carrying the weight of adult dysfunction on his shoulders. That night, I logged into the account and looked at the balance. Solid. Untouched. Exactly where it should be. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt satisfied. People often imagine moments like that as dramatic, as vindication, as a final victory lap. It wasn't. It was quiet. It was confirmation. The system worked because I'd finally insisted on one. The last time I heard about Carol, it was indirectly. A relative mentioned she'd tried to manage a small investment group and been turned down. Too many questions, too much scrutiny, too many people who now knew to ask for paperwork. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel angry either. I felt distant. Distance is underrated. It's often more effective than confrontation. Looking back, the most dangerous part of what she did wasn't the money, it was the certainty. The belief that she didn't need permission because she'd always been allowed to act that way before. That belief only survives in silence. I broke that silence, not by shouting, but by documenting. By involving people whose job it was to care about facts, not family politics. By refusing to be rushed into forgiveness just to restore comfort. That's the part people don't like to talk about, how quickly families push for peace when accountability becomes inconvenient. How often the person who draws the boundary is labeled difficult for not stepping back into the old role. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was how much lighter life felt once I stopped negotiating my authority. I didn't become harsher. I became clearer. And clarity, I've learned, is something people either respect or avoid. Either way, it tells you exactly where you stand. By the time my son committed to a school, the story was no longer something that defined us. It was just something that had happened. A line crossed, a response delivered, a correction made. That's all most conflicts ever need. Not drama, not forgiveness theater, just correction. And once that's done, you're free to move forward without looking back. By the time my son started his senior year, the situation had fully receded into the background of our lives. Not erased, but no longer active. Like a closed file you keep for records but don't need to open anymore. That didn't mean it stopped teaching me things. One morning, while I was reviewing enrollment paperwork, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number again, but this time I hesitated before answering. Old habits die hard. "This is Officer Reynolds," the voice said. "I'm calling regarding a follow-up to a financial inquiry you were involved in last year." I felt that old tightening in my chest, brief and instinctive. "Yes? This isn't about you," he said quickly. "You're not in any trouble. We just needed clarification on a timeline." Of course. He asked a few factual questions. Dates, communications, who had access when. I answered calmly, precisely, the way I'd learned to do through all of this. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the last thread of that chapter pass through my hands. Later that day, I picked my son up from school early, college-related appointment. As he got into the car, he said, "You look serious." "Just tired," I said. "You always look tired when paperwork is involved," he replied, smiling. I laughed. "That's fair." As we drove, he asked something I hadn't expected. "Did it ever scare you? Standing up to them?" I thought about it. Not just the confrontation, but the consequences, the isolation, the way people had looked at me afterward, measuring what kind of person I was now that I'd refused to play along. "Yes," I said honestly, "but not enough to stop me." He nodded. "I think that's important." "So do I." That evening, I found myself thinking about how often fear disguises itself as practicality. How many times I'd told myself it wasn't worth the trouble, that peace was more valuable than confrontation, that things would work themselves out. They don't, not unless someone intervenes. Around that time, I heard through the family network that Carol had tried to reconcile, not directly, through suggestions, through third parties. She'd apparently said she missed how things used to be and wondered if enough time had passed. Enough time for what? I wondered. Forgetting? I declined the invitation without drama. No explanation, no response beyond a polite refusal. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. They need distance to stay safe. The final twist came not from Carol, but from Mark. He called me late one night, nearly 2 years after everything had started. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. "I just wanted to tell you something," he said. His voice sounded different, less defensive, worn down. "Go ahead." "And whoa, you were right," he said. "About the business, about the money." I stayed quiet. "I didn't know where it came from at first," he continued. "Not really. I didn't ask questions I should have. I wanted it to work too badly. And when it fell apart, I blamed everyone but myself." I let him speak. "This wasn't an apology. It was an inventory. I'm not asking you to fix anything," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know I see it now." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. There was a pause. Do you think she knew it would end like this?" I thought about Carol, about the certainty, about how convinced she'd been that she could move things around without consequence. "I think she never thought it would end at all," I said. We hung up after that. No resolution. No reunion. Just acknowledgement. I didn't feel relieved. I felt complete. Completion doesn't come from apologies. It comes from alignment, from knowing your actions matched your values and protected what mattered most. As graduation approached, my son became busier, more independent, less in need of my constant oversight. That transition could have felt like loss. Instead, it felt earned. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun go down, he said, "I know you did a lot of stuff I didn't see." I glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like making sure I didn't have to worry." I swallowed. "That was the idea." He nodded. "Thanks." That was it. No speeches, no big moment. Just gratitude, offered plainly. Looking back now, I don't frame what happened as standing up to my family. I frame it as stepping into my role fully. Parent, guardian, decision maker. Those titles don't come with applause. They come with responsibility. And sometimes, responsibility means disappointing people who benefited from your silence. If there's one thing I'd say to anyone facing something similar, it's this. Don't wait for the situation to feel dramatic enough to justify action. Quiet violations are still violations. Calm responses are still responses. And you don't owe anyone access to what you're protecting. Once you understand that, everything else becomes a matter of process. And process, as I learned, is where real power lives. By the time graduation arrived, I had settled into a version of life that felt earned rather than borrowed. The frantic edge that had once followed me everywhere was gone. In its place was something steadier. Not happiness exactly, but certainty. The kind that doesn't need reassurance. The ceremony itself was crowded and loud and strangely emotional. Parents clapping too hard, students pretending not to look nervous. When my son's name was called, I stood and applauded like everyone else. But inside, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt relief. Not because the moment had gone well, but because nothing had been taken from him along the way. Afterward, as families spilled out onto the lawn taking photos, my parents approached carefully, like they weren't sure where they stood anymore. My mother hugged my son first, her smile real. My father shook my hand, firm, respectful. "You did good," he said quietly. I nodded. He did. On the drive home, my son leaned back in the seat, cap tossed onto the floor, exhaustion finally catching up to him. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly," he said. "For what?" "For not freaking out when things got hard," he replied. "You always just handled it." I kept my eyes on the road. "That's part of the job." "No," he said. "It's not. I see other parents. They panic. They blame people. You didn't." I smiled to myself. I panicked, just not out loud. That summer passed quickly. Orientation dates, housing forms, packing lists. Each task brought a sense of forward movement that felt clean and uncomplicated. One evening, while we were sorting through old boxes in the garage, I came across a folder I hadn't opened in a long time. It held copies of the original trust documents, bank statements, correspondence, everything that had once felt overwhelming. I considered throwing it away. Instead, I closed the folder and labeled it clearly. Not because I needed it, but because records matter. They tell the truth when memory starts to soften edges. My son noticed. "What's that?" "Paperwork," I said. "The boring kind." He laughed. "Figures." As move-in day approached, I felt an unexpected calm. This wasn't an ending, it was a transition. One I'd been preparing for long before I realized it. The night before we left, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. Short. Careful. "I hope things are okay tomorrow." I stared at it for a moment, then replied, "They are." That was all either of us needed. At the dorm, I helped my son carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs, watched him joke with his new roommate, listened as he talked about classes with the same easy confidence he'd developed over the past few years. When it was time to go, he hugged me quickly, awkwardly, then pulled back. "I'll call you," he said. "I know," I replied. Driving away, I expected sadness, maybe loneliness. Instead, I felt something close to satisfaction, not because I was done being needed, but because I'd done my part. A few weeks later, I received one final message related to Carol, a formal notice confirming the closure of the investigation and the resolution of all related matters. It was definitive. Final. I read it once and archived it. That chapter was closed in every sense. Life after that wasn't remarkable in the way stories usually are. There were no big confrontations, no dramatic reunions, just normal days, work, quiet evenings, occasional calls from my son about exams or roommates or cafeteria food. Sometimes, when things were especially calm, I thought about how easily it could have gone another way, how close I'd come to letting discomfort win, how much damage could have been done quietly, politely, under the banner of family. That thought no longer scared me. It reminded me. I didn't win because I was clever or brave or ruthless. I won because I was attentive, because I checked what others assumed I wouldn't, because I refused to accept explanations that required me to give up my authority. And because when someone told me I didn't need to be part of the discussion, I decided that wasn't their call to make. That lesson stayed with me long after everything else faded. It showed up at work, where I asked more questions and delegated less blindly. It showed up in relationships, where I paid attention to patterns instead of promises. It showed up in the way I trusted myself without needing consensus. If there's a moral to all of this, it's not about revenge or standing up to family or dramatic justice. It's simpler. Pay attention. Stay calm. Act when something doesn't add up. And don't confuse access with entitlement. Once you understand that, the rest takes care of itself. The months after my son left for college were quieter than I expected. Not empty, just different. The house no longer carried the low hum of anticipation or worry. Mornings were slower. Evenings stretched out without deadlines attached to someone else's schedule. I adjusted. I picked up hobbies I'd put off for years. Not ambitious ones, simple things. Long walks after work. Cooking meals that took time instead of shortcuts. Reading without constantly checking the clock. The kind of ordinary freedom you don't realize you're missing until it shows up. People assume moments like that come with regret, with second guessing, with a sense of loss that creeps in when the urgency fades. For me, it came with confirmation. Everything I'd done had held. My son was thriving. His calls were upbeat, filled with stories about classes, new friends, minor frustrations that came with independence. Nothing heavy, nothing loaded. One night, he called, just to tell me he'd aced a midterm. I didn't panic, he said proudly. I just made a plan. I smiled. That tends to work. I learned that from you, he added casually, like it was an obvious fact. I sat there for a long time after we hung up, letting that settle. At work, things shifted too. Without realizing it, I'd started carrying myself differently. I spoke with more certainty. I pushed back when something didn't make sense. Not aggressively, just clearly. One afternoon, a colleague tried to rush a decision past me, framing it as urgent when it wasn't. "We don't have time to loop you in," he said. I looked at him calmly. "Then you don't have time to do it." The room went quiet. The decision was delayed. The outcome improved. That was when it clicked. The lesson hadn't been situational. It had been transferable. Boundaries don't just protect money or children, they protect judgment. My parents and I settled into a new normal. We spoke occasionally. Holidays were cordial. There was warmth, but also space. No more assumptions. No more shared control over things that didn't belong to them. They never asked me to manage anything for them again. I never offered. Once, my mother said, almost wistfully, things used to feel simpler. They were simpler, I replied. Just not fair. She didn't argue. I heard about Carol less and less. When her name did come up, it was usually followed by a change of subject. People don't like to dwell on reminders that long-standing dynamics can collapse under scrutiny. I didn't ask questions. The final confirmation came in an unexpected way. One evening, I received a letter from my son's university. Not a bill, not an update, a thank you. A generic acknowledgement tied to a donor fund the account was now connected to. Formal language. Institutional tone. I held it for a moment, then set it down. That letter existed because of a chain of decisions that began with one quiet refusal to be sidelined. I thought back to that night, the notification, the kitchen light, Carol's calm certainty. The way she'd spoken as if authority was something you inherited rather than something you earned or retained. If I'd challenged her emotionally, she would have dismissed me. If I'd yelled, she would have framed me as unstable. If I'd pleaded, she would have waited me out. Instead, I'd done something she hadn't prepared for. I'd stepped out of the family narrative and into a system that didn't care who she was. That was the difference. I didn't need to punish her. I didn't need to humiliate her. I didn't need to win in a visible way. I needed to remove her access. That's the part people misunderstand. Control doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from quietly changing who gets to touch the levers. If I ever tell this story now, it's not with anger, it's with clarity. Because clarity is what kept the situation from repeating itself. No one in my family will ever again assume they can make decisions on my behalf without consequence. Not because they're afraid of me, but because the rules are now visible. That's the real outcome. Not revenge, not estrangement, transparency. And transparency has a way of making entitlement very uncomfortable. As for me, I carry the lesson forward. In finances, in relationships, in parenting, in the way I listen when someone says, "You don't need to be part of this." Because I've learned to ask one simple question in response. According to whom? Once you start doing that, a lot of doors close, and the right ones stay open. The last time I thought about that night, the notification, the empty balance, the calm way Carol told me I didn't need to be part of the discussion, it didn't make my chest tighten anymore. It didn't make me angry. It didn't even make me sad. It felt distant, like remembering a storm after the ground has already dried. That surprised me, because for a long time I thought moments like that were supposed to leave a permanent mark. I thought I'd always feel something sharp when I remembered how close I came to letting someone else quietly decide my child's future. But time doesn't preserve emotion the way we expect it to. It preserves outcomes, and the outcome held. My son finished his first year of college stronger than he started. More confident, more self-directed. When he came home for the summer, he moved through the house like it had always been a place of stability, not something temporary or conditional. That mattered more to me than any courtroom decision ever could. One night, while we were grilling in the backyard, he said something that stayed with me. "I don't worry about money," he said casually. Not in a reckless way. Just, "I know it's handled." I looked at him and realized that was the point all along. Not abundance, not comfort, just certainty. Certainty doesn't come from trusting the loudest voice in the room. It comes from knowing who is accountable when things go wrong. I never told him the full story. I don't plan to. One day, if he asks, I'll explain it in simple terms, not as a warning, but as context. Because the lesson isn't about mistrust. It's about responsibility. People will always offer to help. Some of them mean it. Some of them mean control. The difference isn't always obvious at first. I learned that the hard way. Looking back, the most dangerous part wasn't the money being taken. It was how normal it all felt to everyone else. How easily they justified it. How quickly they decided I didn't need to be included because I'd always been reasonable. Reasonable, in that family, meant flexible. It meant accommodating. It meant absorbing inconvenience so others didn't have to. I had played that role for years without realizing it. Not because I was weak, but because I'd been taught that peace came from compliance. That questioning authority was rude. That family harmony mattered more than individual boundaries. What broke that pattern wasn't anger, it was attention. I noticed something didn't add up. I checked. I asked questions. I followed procedures instead of instincts. And when the answers confirmed what my gut already knew, I didn't talk myself out of action just to avoid discomfort. That's the part I'm proud of. Not that I stood up to my aunt. Not that I won. But that I didn't freeze when the responsibility landed in my hands. A lot of people think calm retaliation looks like indifference. It doesn't. It looks like paperwork. It looks like phone calls made without drama. It looks like choosing systems over speeches. It looks boring from the outside. And that's why it works. If there's anything I would do differently, it's this. I would trust myself sooner. I would stop mistaking delegation for wisdom. I would remember that the person who has the most to lose should never be the last to know what's happening. But regret isn't useful. What's useful is the clarity that came after. Today, my life is quieter. Not because it's smaller, but because it's mine. Decisions are made with intention. Boundaries are stated plainly. I don't rush to smooth things over when something feels wrong. And when someone suggests I don't need to be part of a conversation that affects what I'm responsible for, I don't argue, I don't explain, I don't negotiate. I just don't agree. That's the lesson this all left me with. You don't need permission to protect your child. You don't need consensus to safeguard your future. And you don't owe anyone access just because they've always had it before. They thought they could decide without me. I decided that would never happen again. And that decision changed everything.